Welcome to the podcast called The Battle for African Agriculture, where we use the lens of political economy to look at the present and future of African agriculture. My name is Belay. I'm the General Coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Please subscribe, those of you who are watching this podcast. You will help us to reach as many audiences as possible. Today, on the Battle for African Agriculture, we are honored to welcome Professor Miguel Altieri. Am I calling your name right way?
Correct.
One of the true pioneers of agroecology. Miguel Altieri is Professor Emeritus of Agroecology at the University of California, Berkeley, where he has spent decades researching ecological approach to agriculture and working closely with farmers and social movements around the world. For more than 40 years, Professor Altieri has helped shape agroecology as both a scientific discipline and a practical approach to farming. His research has focused on how biodiversity, traditional knowledge, and ecological processes can strengthen agricultural systems and make them more resilient. He has authored and edited numerous influential books and papers, including Agroecology, the Science of Sustainable Agriculture, Agroecology, Principles and Strategies for Designing Sustainable Farming Systems, Agroecology and the Search for a Truly Sustainable Agriculture. His work has been particularly influential in Latin America. I would say in Africa too, where agroecology has spread widely through farmer movements and community-led initiatives. Professor Altieri has also worked extensively with organizations such as La Via Campesina, helping to bridge the worlds of science, traditional knowledge, and peasant movements. Miguel, it's a truly honor to welcome you to the Battle for African Agriculture.
Thank you, Emilion, for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about your personal journey. You are widely recognized as one of the founders of modern agroecology. Could you begin by telling us how your journey into agroecology started? What were the early experiences or influences that led you to challenge the dominant industrial agricultural model?
Well, I was born in Chile and I studied agriculture, agronomy. And interestingly enough, at that time in Chile, there was an agreement between the University of California and Chile through the Ford Foundation, so that all the professors in the University of Chile would study in California and Davis mostly agriculture. And they went back to replicate the models they learned about conventional agriculture, industrial agriculture, and they taught us that. So
Right.
Chile,
Ford with Rockefeller Foundation was pushing the
the
Green
Green
Revolution
Revolution,
agenda, no?
yeah, of
Yeah,
course, it was part of the Green
yeah,
Revolution together with Rockefeller
yeah.
and Kellogg. But anyway, so Ford
Mm,
funded this program, and these professors got brainwashed and then went back to
mm,
Chile to install the model, which actually, Chile, if you go to Chile, you'll see agriculture is a replica of California, and it has been
mm,
perfected actually in many ways. So
mm,
they never taught me about small farmers. They never taught me about ecology, obviously. And
mm,
it wasn't until I left Chile after the coup, the military coup of 73, and I ended up in
mm,
Colombia.
mhm,
I went by land. I ended up in Colombia. And in
mm,
Colombia, I entered a master's program. And for the first time, I was exposed to small farming systems in the tropics where farmers were using polycultures, agroforestry systems that I felt totally unequipped to understand because I was trained in monoculture agriculture.
mhm,
So luckily, I had the possibility to interact with some ecologists, some anthropologists, some sociologists, and I was able to understand that the systems were complex and that you needed a more systemic approach. You needed to integrate disciplines, and and luckily enough, I also spoke English because I had spent some high school years in one high school year here in California back in when I was 16 years old. So I delved into the literature, and there were some
mm,
ecologists at the time that were working the influence of diversity on pest problems in agriculture, like David
Mhm.
Pimentel, Root, and others in Cornell at that time. So I did my thesis on that. I started, understanding that pests were not the problem. The problem was how we grew the crops. We grew them in monocultures. We sprayed pesticides that were killing the beneficial insects. We used fertilizers that would actually promote nutritional qualities in the crops that would attract pests, and so on and so on. So that's how
Mhm.
I started kind of um, understanding that there was a wider approach that I needed to widen my approach, my understanding of agricultural systems. And then obviously at that time, I'm talking about, the let's see, when are we talking about? 70s, the 70s, late 70s.
Mhm.
There were several very influential books that came out, including Silent Spring, which was
Mm.
denouncing the impact of pesticides on the environment. And then here at Berkeley, there was a professor who, paradoxically, I replaced, called Robert Vandenbosch, who wrote a book called The Pesticide Mafia, which was about
Mhm.
the influence of pesticide companies in the research agenda of public universities, which is
Mhm.
now obviously a much deeper problem because corporations are influencing, including my university, the research agenda of public universities through biotechnology and all the new technologies that are emerging.
Mhm.
So that's how I understood that
Mm.
very quickly, that agriculture was not only a technical problem, was also social and political, and that there
Mm.
were major, major influences that were shaping the way we were farming, and that it wasn't for the good of the people to produce food, healthy food, accessible food, but was basically to enrich a bunch of corporations that made agriculture addicted to agrochemicals and seeds and so on. So that's how kind of
In-
I enter into this field.
Interesting. You say that and now when you're speaking about your story, when you give artificial fertilizers to plants, it makes them susceptible to insects. Did I hear you right?
Yes.
Mhm.
There's actually a very unknown scientist, a French scientist that he died a long time ago, called Francis Chabousseau, who
Mhm.
developed a theory called trophobiosis. And what
Mhm.
he found was that when he compared crops that were fertilized with organic fertilizer versus chemical fertilizer, the same amount of nitrogen, he
Mhm.
found that pests, especially aphids and whiteflies and homopteran insects, reproduce more rapidly in the plants that were fertilized chemically and
Hmm.
with chemical fertilizers, and that their populations densities would be much higher than in organically fertilized crops. Then that research was
Interesting.
was there's then later on many other people came out with some papers showing exactly the same thing. There's a guy
Hmm.
called Phelan that did a lot of research in Ohio and finding out that the same thing. And then I did research on that, and actually we have some papers published showing
Hmm.
that chemical fertilizers basically stimulate pest populations, because what happens is that it's the same amount of nitrogen. What happens is that the chemical fertilizers are very soluble, and then the plant is not able to um, metabolize all the NO3 into protein and amino acids. So there's a lot of free nitrogen in the foliage, as opposed to the
Mhm.
organic, which is a slow release, and therefore the plant is able to metabolize, and there's low free nitrogen on the foliage. So if you compare free nitrogen levels, you'll see that chemically fertilized plants have higher levels of free nitrogen, which actually is a source for the protein synthesis of insects.
Hmm.
And then there's other
Interesting.
papers, and there's some other papers that were written by plant pathologists showing that nitrogen is absorbed by plants as NO3. It's the same NO3 whether it comes from organic matter or whether it comes from a chemical fertilizer. What happens is that NO3 activates certain genes in the plants so that they produce defense mechanisms like different chemical substances that alexins and others that provide defense against diseases. When you apply
Hmm.
fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, which is very soluble, the defenses are activated, but for a short time, maybe 1 month.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
then because you're releasing slowly the NO3 from the chemical organic fertilizer or the green manure or the manure, whatever you're using, the compost, the activation continues for longer. So a plant
Hmm.
that's chemically fertilized has defenses, but only for a short time, whereas the plant that is organically fertilized has defenses for a much longer time, maybe double the time.
Interesting. Let's talk about the origins of agroecology. Today, agroecology is widely discussed around the world and is increasingly practiced also. But when you began working in this field, the concept was still new. How did agroecology emerge as a scientific discipline, and what problem was it trying to address?
Okay. Well, first of all, when we were, and I'm talking when it's a bunch of people from NGOs in Latin America, because the history is as follows. Agroecology was being practiced by traditional farmers for centuries or
Hmm.
millennia, but it wasn't
Hmm.
recognized as a science. It wasn't the farmers didn't recognize it as agroecology. They just
Hmm.
recognized traditional agriculture, which has a very deep ecological basis.
Hmm.
But a bunch of NGOs in Latin America emerged, especially in the Southern Cone during the times of dictatorship, and they started solving problems that the state was not solving, which was basically to produce food for poor people.
Hmm.
And some of them started working with some traditional agriculture influence, but also organic agriculture. And then later on, I came out with a book called Agroecology. I'm talking about 1984, and
Hmm.
that influenced these NGOs to use the agroecological approach.
Hmm.
And then these NGOs were working with farming communities. They set up demonstration farms. They did a bunch of different things. Then students from the universities started coming to these
Hmm.
NGOs in different countries. I'm talking about Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, etc. And they saw that what these NGOs were doing was very different from what they were learning in the universities.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
were learning green revolution, obviously. And so they started demanding that agroecology is taught in the universities. And that's when universities started entering into agroecology. And then,
Hmm.
universities started, some professors in university, not the university as a whole, but professors in university started doing research, writing, working with
Hmm.
farmers and so on. And then later, much later, Via Campesina in Nileyeni,
Hmm.
I think, adopted that.
Nearly in 2007, I think.
Okay, that's when they
Hmm.
adopted agroecology officially. So
Hmm.
social movements like Via Campesina or, for example, MST in Brazil, the landless peasant movement, were not
Hmm.
practicing agroecology. They were pretty much
Hmm.
access to land and using many times conventional approaches to agriculture.
Hmm. Hmm.
So maybe it's different in different continents, but in Latin America, that's the way it grew. Now, when we started, um, we were treated as communists. I'm talking about
Hmm.
the institutions, FAO,
Hmm. Hmm.
CAR, universities, ministries of agriculture. They treated us as communists or hippies or dreamers or whatever. And
Hmm.
agriculture kept growing. What is interesting
Hmm.
is agroecology emerged in Latin America without the support of foundations. There were no
Hmm.
agriculture fund or Magnite Foundation or any of those people interested in agroecology at that time. Actually, Magnite, which now is funding a lot of agroecology, funded a lot of transgenic crop research at the beginning.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyway, so you had the emergence of agroecology through this movement that I described with NGOs, universities, linked with peasant organizations and so on. And they ignored us, basically. They basically ignored us. Then agroecology kept growing without support from foundations, without public policies, without
Mm-hmm.
university programs, solid university programs. And then they couldn't ignore us. They started fighting us. Oh, you cannot feed the world with
Mm-hmm.
agroecology. Agroecology is not science. Agroecology is only for poor farmers. It will never work,
Mm-hmm.
in larger scale agriculture, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But agroecology kept growing, kept growing,
Mm-hmm.
kept growing. The movement started solidifying. We created the Scientific Society of Agroecology. Brazil has its own society, other countries, Argentina, and so on. And the thing kept growing without support, mostly from foundations or policies or governments.
Mm-hmm.
And then where we are now, we are in a point where they don't ignore us, but they co-opted agroecology. So you
Mm-hmm.
have now people that I debated 30 years ago, as I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to tell names, but
Mm-hmm.
people that I debated that they hated agroecology, they were enemies of agroecology, now are at the top of organizations that are promoting agroecology. For example, Agroecology Coalition. So here we are, where we have a major challenge in which we need to, and this is the role of SOCLA, which is the Latin American Society of Agroecology, is to maintain the original mission, the original vision of agroecology, and
Mm-hmm.
without and denouncing all the co-optation approaches that are taking place.
Yep, yep, yep. We'll talk about this one, about social movement a bit later. But let's talk about biodiversity as a foundation of agriculture. A central theme of your work is the importance of biodiversity in farming systems. Why is biodiversity so important for agriculture? And how does biodiversity strengthen resilience in the face of climate change,
Mhm.
pests, and soil degradation?
Well, basically, if you look at least in Latin America, and I know in Africa, I know a little bit of
Mm,
Africa. I've been there and a few times, but I'm not saying that I'm an expert or anything. But most of peasant
mm,
agriculture or indigenous farming systems are based on agrobiodiversity designs. Uh,
mm, mm,
they use polycultures, or they use rotations, or they use agroforestry systems, or integrate animals, because they understand that the interactions between the different components lead to
mm,
logical processes that are fundamental
mm,
for, for the system to work. So within a farming system, you will have what we call functional biodiversity. Functional biodiversity are all the components, the organisms, plants, microbes, insects, etc.,
mm, mm,
that play key ecological roles like pollination, biological control, the composition of organic
mm,
matter,
mm, mm,
etc., for the system to work.
mm,
So basically, what agroecology does is to try to ensemble biodiversity that is going to lead to interactions, and these
mm,
interactions are going to lead to processes that are fundamental
mhm,
for agriculture to function. What processes?
mm,
Regulation of pests and diseases,
mm,
recycling of nutrients,
mm,
activation of soil microbial activity, water
mm,
conservation, etc.,
mm,
etc. All these processes are fundamental. It's just like as humans, if we want to be healthy, we have to good digestion, good circulation, uh,
mm,
etc., etc. Well, the same thing
mm,
in agriculture. If you want to have a healthy farming system, you have to have the biodiversity that is going to promote the interactions that are going to lead to the processes of nutrient
mm,
cycling, biological pest regulation, etc., etc. So that's why
mm,
biodiversity is so important, because it's not just the collection of species, it's the interactions
mm.
between species that lead to this.
Yep,
So,
yep.
for example, how biodiversity leads to control of insect pests. Well, for example, a lot of research, and I did a lot of research too on this corn bean association, the milpa in Latin America. Well,
Mm,
it turns out that when you compare monoculture beans, monoculture corn versus polyculture corn and beans, you find that there's less pests in the system where you have polyculture as monocultures. And there's thousands of
mhm,
papers that have documented this. Why
mhm,
is that? Well, because in the complex system, you create the environmental conditions for beneficial insects, predators, parasites, or pests to thrive. They have
Mm.
alternative food, they have pollen and nectar, they have microclimate that is beneficial, etc. So that's how they reproduce there. And then from there, and then also when you grow crops alone, they become much more apparent to the colonization of insect pests than when you put them together, because as the research that has been done and the push and pull, for example, shows that also there are
Mm.
volatiles that emerge from the plants, and these volatiles play a lot of roles. Some of them repel pests, some of them attract beneficial
Yep.
insects.
Mm.
At the time, we didn't know that. When I was doing this back in the 80s, early 80s, 70s, I'm sorry, late 70s, I didn't know about the chemical interactions, but I was looking at beneficial insects that were thriving in the systems.
Mhm.
So that's one example. Now, how um, biodiversity leads to resilience, there's a lot of different effects. A lot of research that has been done after hurricanes in Latin America, especially in the Caribbean region, in Cuba and Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic,
Mm.
has shown that systems that are more biodiverse are less vulnerable to the impact of hurricanes than monocultures. And
Mhm.
there are protection. For example, if you have agroforestry systems, there's the trees minimize the impact of the winds. There is also less faster recuperation of the system, because in some cases the hurricanes are very strong. The trees fall down.
Mm.
For example,
Mm.
banana trees fall down, but they are not taken out like in the monoculture with roots and everything 20 meters away. The wind in the monocultures
Yeah. Yeah.
throws the
Yeah.
trees very far away. Whereas in the agroforestry system, they fall down and they're still stuck to the ground, and you're able to put them up again. And
Yeah.
that's what farmers do. They put them up again and they become productive again.
Mm.
And then obviously, when we're talking about drought as a threat, which is something that happens a lot in Africa, we're finding that microbial communities in the soil, especially mycorrhiza, that emerge in the
Mm.
systems that are complex, because remember that plants produce a lot of exudates. So the more
Yeah.
roots of different plants you have, the more complex exudates you have, and the more
Mm.
complex beneficial biota you're going to have. And
Mm.
among
Mm.
them is mycorrhiza. And mycorrhiza extends the root system, biologically speaking, 4 times. So if you have a 40 times. So if you have a
Mm.
root hair that is 3 millimeters, really you have 120 millimeters of root, biologically speaking. And that root
Mm.
will explore the soil profile, capturing what is called hygroscopic water, which then allows
Mhm.
the plants to continue in the midst of drought.
Yeah.
So there's a
I
lot of
think, and then
there are a
because
lot
of mycorrhizae that people talk about plants talking to each other.
yeah, because the mycelia connects the
Yeah.
different roots.
Mm. Mm.
So there
Mm.
is a communication, but
Mm.
the 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 mycorrhiza have a very, very important role in resistance to drought, in resistance to diseases, because they also colonize the whole root and they don't allow pathogens to get in, and
Yeah.
also the solubilization of phosphorus. That many times the
Mm.
phosphorus is in the soil, but it's not soluble. So the solubilization of phosphorus is very important through mycorrhiza.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, solubility is very much important. Let's talk about traditional knowledge in indigenous farming systems. Another area that you are very much interested in, and you have an area that you have an expertise. Your research has often highlighted the value of traditional and indigenous agricultural systems. What lessons have you learned from small-scale farmers, indigenous communities that modern agriculture science sometimes overlooks? I think you've mentioned that, but if you could expand on that.
Well, what is interesting is that traditional farming systems, for example, in Latin America, we have systems still practiced as they were practiced 10,000 years ago. If you go to
Mm.
the Andean region, if you go to Mesoamerica, in some regions of Mesoamerica, there are
Where
pockets
is
of.
what is the country? I mean, most of our listeners
Okay, so
would only
Andean region.
understand the name of the countries.
Okay, so the Andean region would be Peru, Bolivia, parts of
Uh-huh.
Colombia, and
Mm.
then you go to the Mesoamerican region, which is Guatemala, southern Mexico. all that area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really, what you find that there are still systems that still exist. There are microcosms
Mm-hmm.
of traditional
Mm-hmm.
agriculture that have stood the test of time,
Mm-hmm.
despite all that has happened, all the changes, climatic, economic, political, you name it. Those systems are still there. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I became interested in early on, influenced by work of many other people that did this kind of research before, um, especially geographers, anthropologists, is that why do the systems have stood the test of time? What is it that they have
Mm-hmm.
that 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 allows them to continue? And obviously, on the one side is the knowledge, which in some areas still persists. In some areas, it has been fragmented. In some regions, there
Mm-hmm.
there are certain um, um, levels of knowledge that are left, but not the whole holistic knowledge of the whole system. And
Mm-hmm.
so, this knowledge that these farmers have has been developed through generations by understanding nature in their own way. They have their own
Mm-hmm.
classification of plants and animals and soils. For example, farmers in the Peruvian region, in the highlands of Peru, are gonna tell them how is your soil, and they're gonna hit the soil with their shoe and sound, and then you're gonna say,
Mm-hmm. Really?
yeah, you're gonna say, what? These guys are crazy. I mean, I never learned that in the university. So they have their
Mm-hmm.
own unique classification systems, or they classify plants according to the taste, or the soil according to the odor. So there are different indicators that farmers have
Yeah.
developed,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and that obviously we didn't learn in Western science, and many Western scientists are going to laugh at those indicators. But
Mm-hmm.
it turns out that those indicators are the ones that guided them to develop this complex system that have stood the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to this knowledge, that and also this knowledge is embedded in a social fabric in which farmers usually work collectively. In
Mm-hmm.
America, there's a thing called the minga, where farmers work together. I'm sure in Africa the same thing.
Yeah, we
And,
have double, and yeah, so many of them. Yeah.
and then we have the land tenure system, in which is a collective management of the watershed and things like that. So that has led then to the development of practices and systems that are based on biodiversity, that are based on rich soils, based on management of the soil with a lot of organic matter, that are systems that there's a lot of recycling between one component and the other, animals and plants, and so on and so on. So that's when you look at those systems, then you understand, that the principles of agroecology are there. The
Mm.
same thing when I look at the systems I had the opportunity to study, because I was involved in FAO Global Indigenous Agricultural Heritage Systems in the
Oh,
creation
okay.
program at the beginning. We were in
Mm.
China, and we found that these farmers had rice, and they had ducks, and they had fish, and they had azolla. Azolla is a plant that grows in the over the surface of the water, together with the rice, fixes the nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
The fish would eat the insect pests. The ducks would eat the weeds, and they would eat also the snails.
Mm.
And then you start finding out that when you look at the interactions, the role of the ducks, the fish, and the azolla, and the rice, then you find that the farmers understood,
Mm.
empirically, the principles of
Mm.
agroecology. So
Mm.
that's where the principles of agroecology came out. We came out with 6 principles of agroecology. Then obviously they were expanded because there's also social principles. But at the beginning we
Yeah.
were at the ecological principles. And all those principles are the ones that characterize traditional agriculture. Now, those principles can be applied in modern agriculture, but they will take different technological forms.
Mm. Mm.
So and so because some people say, well, but you cannot replicate the chinampas or the whatever system, you cannot replicate those traditional systems. No, you can't. But what you can do is extract the principles, apply them in modern agriculture, and they will take a different form, a different technological form, a different
Mm.
set of practices.
Mm. Mm. Um, but by the way, did you participate in the development of the 10 elements of agroecology and certain principles of agroecology?
No, but we
And what do you
didn't.
feel about that, about those elements and principles?
Well, I think they're useful.
Mm.
Um, it's it's interesting that now FAO, because FAO is the one that developed this, uh, you know, after 30 years of fighting against agroecology, because that's the truth,
Mm.
now they are the ones that came out with the principles, you know. Um,
Yeah.
I find that the principles are okay, but and I don't have any problem with them. I think it's a good synthesis of understanding,
Mm.
yeah, the
Okay.
principles,
Okay.
including social ones.
Okay. I
It's
mean,
an interesting point.
yeah, the elements of culture clearly written in it, but in the principles, it's expressed as social values or something. So I'm not sure whether cultural element is very well reflected in the certain
Yeah.
principles of agriculture. That's what I feel personally. I don't know about you. Let's talk about industrial agriculture and its limits. Many governments still promote industrial agriculture based on monocultures, chemical inputs, and high yielding technologies. From your perspective, what are the ecological and social limits of this model?
Well, first of all, I think the limits have already been reached. I mean, if you look
Yeah.
at ecological indicators, there's more than 500 species of pests that are resistant to more than 1,000 pesticides, so they don't work.
Mm,
If you look at what's going on right now with a war against Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, not only there is the flow of 20% of the global petroleum, is the also about 40% of the ingredients that are necessary for chemical fertilizers all also go through there. And this is
yeah.
happening right in the spring when the North Hemisphere, United
Mm,
States, Europe, are ready to plant their crops. And so there's the fertilizer cost already went up. It went up during the
mm,
pandemics. Now it's going to go up again, and it went
mm,
up with the Ukraine war. So you can see the vulnerability of this model that is totally dependent
yeah.
on fertilizers that are subject to disruptions because of war, because of
Mm,
pandemics, because of this and that. So the limits have already
mm,
been reached. I mean, this is a system that is so vulnerable. And
mm,
also, if you look at what's happening with climate change, most of the research that is coming out is showing that monocultures are much more susceptible than more diversified
mm,
farming systems to climate change. So
mm, mm,
with every drought, every extreme weather event, the systems start collapsing and collapsing. The monoculture systems start collapsing and collapsing.
mm, mm, mm,
So
mm.
I think we could go on and on about the limits of the
Yeah.
industrial
Yeah.
agricultural
Yeah.
system,
So many. It's so many.
but
No, I totally
basically
agree.
there's also the yield, what is called the law of of the decreasing yields, which the more
Mm,
fertilizer you put, the less yield increases go up. Um,
mm, mm,
this is coming out from Liebig, von Liebig, which was one of the founders of the Green Revolution, actually, because
mm,
he was very much was a German scientist talking about the limiting factors. And but he showed a graph that is interesting. The more fertilizer you put, the more the yields will go up to a point that he
mm,
called
mm,
the limits of decreasing yields. And
mm.
because the plants don't respond anymore
Yeah.
to higher levels of fertilizers, and the higher levels of fertilizers also lead to other problems like acidification of the soil or making the systems more susceptible to pests and diseases, as I was talking about
Mm,
earlier, and so on
mm,
and so on.
mm, mm. Yep. Let's go to talk about, every time we have a discussion with the elites in government and whatever, even for with civil society, always a question of feeding the world will come up. And in our continent about feeding the increasing number of population. So the
Mhm.
common argument is that industrial agriculture is necessary to feed a growing global population. How do you respond to the claim that agroecology cannot produce enough food?
Well, the statistics basically reject that concept because as it is well known, actually UN published this information, not me or Peter Rosset or anybody else, is that 70% of the food that we eat comes from small farms in the world, small farms that are less than 2 hectares in size. And so actually there's a lot of research showing that total output in small farms is much higher than total output in monocultures at a much more efficient way of managing energy and water and other resources. So that provides the basis for land reform, because if small farms are much more productive, then why isn't that we don't convert, all the land into small farms? Obviously, there would be a problem also of who is going to farm, because there's not many people left, and the young people are leaving the countryside, which is a major issue in Latin America. I don't know, in Africa, I imagine it's the same.
Same, some countries, in some
So we
countries,
have
not in
to
all, but.
we have to seduce the young people to bring them back to the land, but you have to give them visions, an integral land reform, which they have opportunities of all kinds in order to farm. But this Malthusian um, concept that the world population is increasing exponentially and food production is not catching up is a very old argument, and it actually was the foundational argument of the Green Revolution.
Yeah.
But it turns
Yeah.
out that today in the world, there's enough food to feed 9 billion people. What happens is that there's poverty, so people don't have access to food. There's problems of lack of access to land for people to produce food. Most of the land is concentrated in big land holdings, especially in Latin America. And there are other problems. So it's not a problem of scarcity. It's a problem of equity. It's a problem of the distribution, and so on and so on. Because if you look at, for example, how much food Europe and United States throws away every day. I mean, one American, one European on average throws away about 110 or 120 kilos of food per year. If that food could magically be transported to countries that are suffering hunger, that would solve the problem. On the other hand, how much land is being devoted for cattle? For example, Brazil, Argentina in Latin America produce thousands and thousands of hectares. We're talking about 7 million or more hectares devoted for what? For soybean, transgenic soybean. For what? To produce fodder for China or for other countries. If that
Yeah.
land was devoted to produce food, you know, and then you
Yeah.
have the concept of the ghost acres. The ghost acres are the hidden acres that Northern Europe, those countries that cannot produce food, because they have short season, like Denmark and Sweden, Finland, and you name it, Germany, and so on and so on. You know how many acres of land in Africa, Latin America, Asia is being devoted to produce food for those people,
Yeah.
opposed to the local people. So it,
Yeah.
it is really a political issue of
Yeah.
distribution of food, access to food, equity, social equity, rather than a technical problem. Perhaps in the future, now with climate change and with the wars and all that, maybe food production is going to be limited because of other factors, and it's going to exacerbate the problem. But if we did land reform, if we promoted agroecology, maybe we could actually reduce the
Yeah.
problem in some way or mitigate the problem.
Let's talk about Latin America now. It has spread widely in some parts of Latin America, not in all of them. What factors have made that possible, and what role farmers' organization and social movements played? In addition to that, how do you understand the social movement side of agroecology? It's at least less understood part of agroecology. Now people understand the practice side of agroecology, less so the science, but very, very less so the social movement side of agroecology. So, yeah. Sorry, so many questions at the same time, you know?
Yeah,
What are the factors to allow the spread of agroecology in Latin America?
yeah.
And what was
Well,
the role of governments? Yeah,
I think Latin America has the same features or characteristics or conducing factors that many other countries in Africa or Asia have, which is one,
yeah,
still the presence of traditional agriculture. There's
yeah.
still traditional knowledge. That's very, very important
Mm,
in different forms, in different areas. Um, you have um, traditional varieties of crops.
mm.
Remember, the Green Revolution only came up with 7,000 varieties, and small farmers have more than 2 million varieties in their hands, land races,
Wow. Mm,
local varieties. So all that genetic diversity is very, very fundamental for the
mm.
future of agriculture.
Is that recorded, the statistics that you told me?
Yes, actually, it's in a book by Paul. No, not put Pat Mooney.
Oh,
Which
Patmoni, okay. Mm,
talks about that the small farmers have 2 million varieties in their hands, as opposed to 7,000 that were invented by the Green Revolution.
oh,
So
wow, okay.
you have the
Mm,
traditional knowledge, you have the genetic diversity, and then the traditional knowledge translates into practices of soil and water and biodiversity management. That's
mm,
also there. The polycultures, the agroforestry systems, the crop livestock integrated system, all that is there.
mm,
And then you have social organizations, strong sort of social
mm,
organizations,
mm,
and that's a very important other component. And then you have a body, a theoretical body that is agroecology, that was developed through in the last 40 years by university people, by NGOs, together with farmers. So all those five components are there. Now, social
mm,
organizations, social movements um, are not only rural movements, they're also urban movements,
mm,
um, because there's a lot of consumers that have become aware about the importance of where food comes from, and they have joined forces with farmers, and they have created their own markets. For example, in Brazil and Colombia, there are many, many markets in which consumers and producers get together at the local level. There is exchange of money, but also they share other values like peace and love for nature, love for family. So it's not just
mm.
economic transaction. So those movements are very, very important. But the social
Yeah.
movements then have played a major role in pushing governments to create
Mm,
agroecological laws. So we have five
mm,
countries in
mm,
Latin America that have agroecology laws, national laws of
mhm,
agroecology. Brazil was the first
mhm,
one. Then we have Colombia that recently did one, Uruguay,
mhm,
uh, Bolivia, and Cuba.
mhm,
These are countries that have come up with national laws of agroecology. So social movements play a very, very important role in pushing governments, in pressuring governments to act,
mhm,
and
mm,
create
mm,
laws which have to translate into, they have to be implemented, because what happens with laws of agroecology, like it happened in Brazil, when Bolsonaro, which was a right-wing government, um, did not implement the law. They had to wait for
mhm,
Lula to come for the second time to re-implement the law. So unfortunately, these legal um, instruments are subject to political will. If you have the government that wants to support the law and implement it, fine. If not, it's not going to work. So this is
mm,
why we say that agroecology cannot depend on the political will or on laws on anything. It has to continue expanding through social movements. So the scaling up of agroecology is done through social movements and through tools like campesino campesino, peasant to peasant
mm,
movements, or what we call the lighthouses, which are model farms, farmers that have been are applying agroecology that illuminate other farmers in the region to
mm,
the
mm.
same.
Yeah. Excellent. One critics is also, one constant argument that we hear is, um, can agroecology scale? In your view, what are the key conditions needed for agroecology to spread at larger scale?
Yeah. So people tell me, well, if agroecology is so good, why is not being practiced by everybody?
Mm,
There's a lot of barriers. There are political barriers. There are corporate influences that want to make sure that agroecology doesn't, expand, for example, by
mm,
colonizing universities and
mm,
funding universities and deviating the public agendas I was talking about before. There's a lot of problems with the extension services. I mean, one thing
mm.
is to have a law in a country, but then your extensionists are all conventional. You have to retrain those
Yeah. Mm,
extension people, or you have to replace them with new ones that come up with an agroecological vision.
mm,
There is also market biases because
mm.
industrial agriculture works with economics of scale, so they can move tremendous amount of food and make it cheaper. Actually, here in
Yeah.
California,
Yeah.
for example, I'm in California right now. Um, a small farmer that lives 100 kilometers from here, it's more expensive for him to bring 100 kilos of tomatoes to this city and 100 kilometers away than tomatoes coming from
Mm.
Florida because
Wow.
of the economics of scale.
Mm, mm.
And so there are
Yeah.
those issues, and 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 there's also the monocultures of the mind. A lot of people
Mm, mm, mm.
colonized by the Green Revolution, and now they're enamored by the new technologies because the Green Revolution and transgenic crops is part of the past. Now we're talking
Mm,
about the new technologies. For example, CRISP, which is the gene
mm.
editing,
Yeah.
gene editing, silencing genes, activating genes with different chemicals, robotics,
Yeah.
artificial intelligence, digital
Yeah.
agriculture. All that stuff is coming very, very heavy. And interestingly, even governments, ministries of agriculture of the governments that are progressive, get seduced by this stuff. Very,
Yeah.
very much. I
Yeah.
live in Colombia all the
Yeah.
time. The people in the Ministry of Agriculture are totally seduced about the new technologies that are coming up. And I find that's very dangerous. I mean, there are tools, but you cannot depend on them. Agroecology is
Yeah.
much more labor intensive, it's much more knowledge intensive, and requires site-specific actions at the local level.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I think one challenge probably is even if farmers want to change from conventional agriculture to agroecology, they need some time, at least 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, depending on the context.
Yeah,
And there's nobody to cover this opportunity cost, you know.
exactly.
So that's part of the problem too. But let's go to,
But, but, but
we
but
running out of.
before we go to that question, let me tell you an example that
Yes, yes.
exercise that I do with students. Uh,
Mm,
I tell them use AI and ask a question about designing an agroecologically based system. You can do that in Africa, in any place, and ask AI to give you the elements to design a farm that is based on agroecology in such a place.
mm-hmm,
And so you have 50 students, and they're all going to type the same question. And what's going to happen is that AI is going to come up with a design that is the same for all of them. The 50 of them are going to come up with the same design because
really? Yeah,
yeah, because AI homogenizes
yeah,
homogenizes.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
actually acts it. But if you ask 50 students without AI, give
yeah.
me the principles, you're going to have 50 different ideas.
Mm,
So
mm,
what I see AI is about the
mm.
homogenization of the mind of the people. And it's a very
Actually,
dangerous tool, in my opinion, for just based on AI, you're not going to get all the answers. Maybe you can type that and get some information, but you really need to rely on farmers' knowledge
yeah,
on with the
yeah.
local farmers,
No,
and that's
no.
essential.
And it is so much that AI doesn't know,
Of course.
That's why they're pushing into some continents like Africa, because it's very, very little known about our agricultural situation. And it's very foolish for an African, whatever, extension agent or researcher to ask about agriculture in Africa because the AI does not have a data about our agriculture. Anyway, let's go to agroecology and food sovereignty. By the way, that example is a fantastic example. Many advocates argue that agroecology and food sovereignty go hand in hand. Why is it important to connect ecological farming with questions of power, land, and control over food systems, which food sovereignty is concerned about?
Okay. I'm going to make a little graph here. I don't know if you see that. This is
Yeah,
this is supposed to be a pyramid.
yeah.
Okay. So in order for you to build a pyramid, you have to have a base. You have to have a
Mm, mm,
floor, or however you call it. Well, the basis of the pyramid of food sovereignty is agroecology. If you don't have farms that are designed with agroecological principles that are resilient to climate change, et cetera, that are independent of external inputs, petroleum and so on, you cannot build a pyramid. You cannot have food sovereignty without having a base of smart farmers.
I totally with you. That's what my thinking is also.
Okay. So what
Exactly,
happens
yeah.
is that there is a tension. There is and this is a tension that I have had with my friends like Peter Rosset, where
Mm,
he thinks that political and social issues are more important than technical ones. And
mm,
I said, no, both are important, but you cannot build the food sovereignty pyramid without the technical dimension by having very resilient, biodiversified,
mm,
autonomous agricultural systems based on agroecology. If you don't have this, you cannot build the pyramid. And so it's an argument that is going on in with Via Campesina. It's important that they have these debates. But for example,
yeah.
now I'm worried a little bit about the way they want to approach food sovereignty, because food sovereignty basically means that a country or a region or a community is able to produce their own food in their own terms with their own agricultural
Mm,
systems. Okay,
mm,
and for that you have to do systems that are based on agroecology. But for example, right now there's a huge emphasis on, I don't know if in Africa, but what we call here in Latin America biofabricas, which means biological input, little factories of
mm,
biological inputs, uh,
mm-hmm. Like
fertilizers,
biofertilizers.
biopesticides, biofertilizers.
Biofertilizers, yeah.
And that's important in the transition where you start from conventional agriculture into agroecological designs. You're going to start diversifying your farm and so on and so on. You need at the beginning some biofertilizers and biopesticides.
Mm,
But if you set up these factories, which they are setting up, for example, in Brazil, MST, big factories, big bio factories, they get stuck in what we call input substitution.
mm,
Instead of using chemicals, we use biopesticides, but we keep the monoculture. And what we want in agroecology is to transcend that. We go beyond monoculture, beyond dependency of even organic compounds. At some point, and I have experienced this in my own farm, we have been designing our farm for 5 years. We started with a
mm,
pasture, abandoned pasture. Now it's an agroforestry system. And the labor needs and the input needs went down to almost zero now because the system is also depending only on the interactions between the different components that I have in the farm.
hmm.
And I find that,
I was about to ask you to tell me about your farm. In
okay,
short, our time is
yeah.
being finished, but it will
Well,
be
it's,
fascinating with all your knowledge, your experience. How are
yeah.
you designing your own farm?
Well, we designed our own farm with my wife, Clara Nichols, who is also an agroecologist.
Yeah, I
And
know Clara. My greetings. Yeah.
thank you very much, and I'll tell her.
Mm,
Um, we found this piece of land in the highlands of southwest Colombia, and
mm,
it's paradoxical. I mean, why did I end up in this hillside somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Colombia? It's
mm,
because I feel that, I'm 75 years old, and what I want to, somehow the universe gave me these 6 hectares that I need to transform, that I need to give life. I need to create
mm,
space of hope, a lighthouse in this world that is
mm,
so dark with so many things.
mm,
So also a challenge. I said, well, I being a professor of agroecology, okay, let's do it in practice. let's
mm,
see. And the distance between the gap between theory and practice is huge. I've been humiliated many, many times by my farm, in the
mm,
sense that I thought I knew it all and I don't. I have been
mm,
blessed to have neighbors that are small farmers that have taught me a lot. And it has been a
mm,
fantastic journey. We're learning a lot, and we are finding now that our system, it gave me confidence on the theory of agriculture, agroecology, because I feel that many things that I'm doing are working and that the
mm,
principles really work, and that
mm.
now it's time to share. So we're opening up now the farm for visitors. There's a lot of students coming from different universities in Colombia. I have had even foreign students coming in, and we're sharing, what we're doing with other people.
Ah, okay. Okay, that's very much important. Let's talk about, our time is running, but seeds and agricultural diversity. Seeds are increasingly controlled by corporations through patents and intellectual property. How
Mhm.
important is seed sovereignty in maintaining agricultural biodiversity and farmers' autonomy?
Well, it's fundamental. I mean, as I was telling you before, small farmers are the custodians, women and men, and especially women, the
Mm,
custodians of seed diversity, seed biodiversity. And as I was telling you, it is calculated that they have more than 2 million varieties of different crops.
mm, mm, mm,
And this is fundamental because it's the base for the resilience of the future. For example, it's interesting that a traditional variety, if you compare with a burlock variety, with a green revolution variety, when you
yeah,
have
Norman Burlow.
yeah, when you have water and fertilizer, yes, the conventional variety, the modern variety is going to yield much more. But when you look
Mm,
at productivity and you have no water now, there's a drought, and you look at productivity not only in kilos per hectare, but in kilos per hectare per centimeter of water, then the traditional variety is going to be 3 times more productive than the modern variety. So,
mm,
for the times that are coming, especially under climate change scenarios, under limited availability of chemical fertilizers and so on, traditional varieties are the ones that are going to lead the way, and modern
mm,
varieties
mm,
are
mm.
going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah. Um, the agroecology is gaining recognition globally, but still faces criticism from sometimes some scientists and policymakers. What do you think are the biggest misunderstanding about agroecology?
Well, I don't think there's misunderstanding, and these people are smart enough to read the literature that is available on agroecology. I mean, if they want to, a minister of
Mm,
agriculture or a director of research institute or the scientists that work there. I think, on the one side, uh, it has to do with the monocultures of the mind, in the sense that they were trained that way, and
mm,
agroecology challenges the way they were trained. Can you
mm,
imagine a PhD in biotechnology in Davis or wherever? You try to tell him about agroecology, is going to threaten the basis of all his knowledge.
mm,
And and so I think what's important with these people is to try to, instead of challenging them, when you create programs that are interdisciplinary, um, say that they have a contribution to make. So an
mm,
agroecologist has to know what to extract from a biotechnologist, for example, without criticizing the biotechnologies. Because if you
mm,
start criticizing the biotechnology, then he or she is gonna shut up. But you
mm,
say, I need to know how this gene function works, then
mm,
that person will join the team, and so on and so on. So I think that there are political barriers in the mind, because
mm,
agroecology also, what happens, it talks about food sovereignty, it talks about land reform, it talks about political change, and many scientists get threatened by that. I don't want,
mm,
science is neutral, so I don't want to hear anything about politics or anything like that.
mm, mm,
They
mm,
work in a very um, defined space, and they don't want to get out of that space, because that makes them nervous. That challenges their
mm,
uh,
mm,
their form
mm,
their way of thinking.
mm,
So, and then you have big influences of funders that actually, um, that actually promote approaches that are against agroecology.
Hmm.
Like in my university in Berkeley, basically the agroecology program that I created was shut down. And
Oh, really?
well, there's a new professor, but basically most of the stuff that we did has been totally eliminated or deleted,
Hmm.
as it was with
Hmm.
the pioneers that I joined, because I joined Berkeley when there was a very strong group of biological control scientists. The division of
Hmm.
biological control was very fundamental in creating actually the program in Africa of biological control that Hans Herren led. Hans
Hmm.
Herren
Hmm.
studied at Berkeley.
Hmm.
And so there's a big legacy. But all that was just deleted completely from the institutional memory of this institution.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
basically, the big funding that is coming is all coming from corporations, and it's going against that direction that we originally.
Hmm. What a pity. I think it's a pity because in Africa the story is totally opposite. So many universities are endorsing agroecology now.
Yeah,
Agroecology at the BSc level, master's level, PhD. I think in Europe also so many universities are teaching
yeah,
agroecology. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I hope that it continues, and I hope
Yeah,
that
but you cannot
and,
stop it,
and
I
I hope
think.
that it captures or incorporates the original dimensions and the origins of agroecology, because as I was saying before, there's a lot of cooptation of agroecology.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
funny,
yeah, definitely.
I was in the land reform conference in Colombia not too long ago in Cartagena,
Yeah,
and
the Icarda.
yeah.
Like, okay, you were
And,
there.
and here
Okay.
and here was this guy from the Agroecology Coalition, a nice guy, this Filipino guy, I don't remember his name.
Hmm.
And he was lecturing about agroecology, and there we are sitting, Peter Rosset, myself, Clara, and others. Agroecology listened to this guy to tell us what agroecology was,
Hmm.
and with a different agenda, I mean. So I think that people need to be aware that there is a
Hmm.
cooptation of agroecology, and to
Hmm.
identify
Hmm.
what is the real objective and the goals of agroecology, which is basically to make
Hmm.
farmers more resilient, more autonomous, more
Hmm.
and also continue utilizing their traditional knowledge, because the traditional
Hmm.
agricultural
Hmm.
knowledge, the basis is one of the bases of
Hmm.
agriculture.
Finally, if we look ahead of 20 or 30 years, what would a truly agricultural global food system look like? And what steps do we need to take today to move in that direction?
Well, one thing is
Yeah.
what you wish, what you wish it would
Hmm.
be. And the other thing is the reality. And
Yeah.
I think that the world has reached some ecological limits. If you look
Hmm.
at the planetary boundaries, for example, I
Hmm.
think that we already overshoot. We're in ecological overshoot.
Hmm.
We have transcended some limits, and I think that is what's going to be important is how resilient the systems can be to face
Hmm.
not only climate change, but all these interruptions that are happening with war and pandemics and things like that. And one
Yeah.
of the things that worries me is that there is a limit to resiliency. I mean, agroecology can enhance the resiliency of farming systems. There's no doubt about that. I have
Hmm.
eyewitnesses in my farm. But sometimes there are limits. For example,
Hmm.
when I get, because we don't have irrigation in our farm, and when we get a drought period that lasts for 1 month, in which evapotranspiration is 4 times the rainfall, then the systems start breaking down. It doesn't matter how much agroecology you did, how much organic matter you put in the soil, how
Hmm.
much mulching you're doing, how much agroforestry you're doing. There is a point where the system breaks down. They break down much later than conventional, but there's a limit to resilience. And that's
Yeah.
something we need to work on, the limits of resilience and how to extend those limits, because I think climate change is going to get worse. There's no doubt about
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Uh, and then there's going to be huge disruptions of food chains and um, and so on and so on. And we need to start promoting more local agriculture. Urban agriculture is
Hmm.
very important, actually, and you can design
Yeah.
urban agriculture with agroecology. And local peri-urban agriculture is very important. We need to strengthen that because you
Mm,
see, by the year 2030, which is around the corner, it is calculated that 80% of humanity is going to live in cities. And cities of 10 million
mm,
people are going to triple in numbers. And in order to feed a city of 10 million people, you have to import 6,000 tons of food per day,
mm,
which needs to travel about 1,000 kilometers on average. That's
mm,
totally unsustainable given the political
mm,
situation and climate situation of the world. And
mm.
that's why we need to promote local food systems. Because here,
Yeah.
for example, in the Bay Area in California, where I am right now, if there is an earthquake tomorrow or now, I hope
Mm,
not, but it's predicted, and all the bridges go down, and the airports don't work, and the ports don't work, the food would last 2 days
wow.
in the supermarkets, 2 days, and after that, total chaos. But if you have a city that would prepare for that by creating urban agriculture programs that
Mm,
and urban agriculture programs, then maybe the shock would not that be that great. So we need to prepare, and the only way to prepare
yeah.
by promoting local food systems based on agroecology.
What a lovely, lovely, lovely discussion, Miguel. I'm sure our listeners will be very, very happy to listen to you, and it's very much informative, very passionate. I didn't expect less than this, talking,
Thank you.
talking to you. Though, this is really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Million.